A surge of energy after a win, followed by the quiet drop that makes the next task feel heavier. Why does dopamine rise and fall in such precise rhythms, shaping both focus and fatigue? Welcome to Neuro Rest, where we explore neuroscience with calm clarity. Today we'll trace the complete map of dopamine, from its baselines and peaks to the tools that stabilize motivation across work, study, and recovery. To make this journey complete, I've prepared a free practical guide with a concise summary of today's lesson, waiting in the description like a map you can return to whenever needed. Settle in. Let's begin with the chemistry of drive. Imagine standing in the desert at dawn. The sky glows with soft color, and though the world seems still, deep beneath your skull molecules of dopamine are already whispering to neurons, preparing you to seek, to move, to notice. This chemical is often called the messenger of pleasure, yet that label hides its true role. Its power lies less in joy and more in the drive to pursue. Dopamine operates with two rhythms. One is a steady background hum, a tonic level that sets your baseline mood and readiness. The other is a brief burst, a phasic spike that erupts when something unexpected happens, when a reward or surprise jolts the system. These two modes together create a balance that determines how much motivation you feel. If the baseline is too low, the world seems flat and effort feels heavy. If spikes are frequent but shallow, novelty loses its pull. When you experience something intensely rewarding, the spike rises and then fades. The paradox is that after the fade, your baseline can dip below where it began. This is why a day of indulgence may leave you strangely flat the next morning. The system is designed to adapt, not to allow endless elevation. The same mechanism that makes novelty exciting also ensures that repeated exposure dulls its power. In evolutionary terms, this prevents fixation and pushes you to keep exploring. For daily life, this has practical implications. It means every peak carries a cost, and the cost is paid in the hours that follow. If you combine many rewarding stimuli, caffeine, music, scrolling, conversation, sugar, the peaks may feel high, but the later baseline is lower. What feels like productivity stacking can become depletion stacking. This rhythm explains why people may crave yet simultaneously lose drive when they overstimulate. The brain circuits involved stretch across the midline of your skull. In the ventral tegmental area, clusters of dopamine neurons project both forward to limbic regions and downward to the striatum. These pathways do not operate in isolation. They interact with serotonin, noradrenaline, and local inhibitory cells. The net result is a finely tuned signal that can push you toward effort or pull you into rest. Emerging evidence shows that subjective framing matters. If you interpret effort as meaningful, the dopamine rise may occur during the action itself rather than only after reward. This supports resilience because the work no longer feels like a barren climb, but like a source of fuel. In contrast, if effort is framed as suffering, the system delays the spike, making motivation fragile and dependent on outcomes. There are limits here. Dopamine is not infinite. Vesicles that store it can deplete, and receptors can downregulate. This explains why cycles of binge and crash occur. It also explains why restoration through sleep, light exposure, nutrition, and stillness is necessary. Without replenishment, even the most disciplined mind will find its drive slipping. So as you reflect on today's lesson, consider dopamine not as a simple molecule of pleasure, but as the sculptor of motivation, constantly balancing peaks and baselines. The next section will explore in greater depth the difference between slow tonic release and brief phasic bursts, and how those rhythms shape both attention and satisfaction. Dopamine does not flow in a single stream. It carries two distinct patterns of release, each shaping your mental landscape in a different way. One is the gentle background level, known as tonic release. The other is the sudden flare, called phasic release. Together they act like the ocean tide and the crashing wave, always intertwined yet serving unique purposes. Tonic release is the quiet hum of your motivational system. It represents the baseline concentration of dopamine that circulates at all times, even when you are not seeking reward. This background tone sets your general level of drive. When tonic levels are higher, the world feels engaging, and possibilities seem within reach. When they fall, even small tasks can appear daunting. Disorders like Parkinson's illustrate this vividly. When dopamine neurons degenerate, tonic levels collapse, leaving not only movement impaired but mood flattened. Phasic release is different. It is triggered by unexpected events or cues that predict reward. Imagine hearing your name called with good news, or solving a problem after long effort. Neurons fire in sharp bursts, releasing dopamine in concentrated pulses. This creates a strong teaching signal. The brain uses these spikes to mark moments of importance, essentially writing a note that says, "Remember this, it mattered." Over time, phasic release sculpts habits, attaching energy to certain actions and places. The interaction between tonic and phasic modes is subtle but essential. If your tonic level is high, phasic spikes stand out more sharply against the baseline, making events feel exciting. If tonic levels are low, the same event may not register as rewarding. This helps explain why people in low motivation states struggle to feel pleasure even when good things occur. The peaks depend on the platform beneath them. Research shows that the timing of phasic release also matters. A reward delivered at random times produces stronger learning than a reward given predictably. This is the basis of gambling machines, social media likes, and variable ratio reinforcement in experiments. The unpredictability of the spike maximizes its teaching power, yet this same principle can trap people in cycles of craving, since the brain becomes tuned to expect the possibility of a sudden surge. From a practical perspective, tonic and phasic release shape how you engage with study and work. If you rely only on large spikes waiting for the big exam result or the praise from a teacher, motivation will be fragile. But if you learn to attach small phasic rises to the act of working itself, for example by recognizing progress during the process, you protect the baseline. Over time, this can build a resilient drive that does not collapse when external rewards are absent. There are limits, however. Excessive phasic firing from drugs like amphetamine or cocaine can flood the system, depleting reserves and damaging plasticity. This not only lowers tonic levels afterward, but blunts the brain's ability to learn from natural rewards. By contrast, healthy behaviors such as exercise, novelty exploration, or safe cold exposure can engage phasic release without exhausting the baseline. A reflective note: think of tonic release as the emotional climate and phasic release as the weather. Both matter, but while storms come and go, the underlying climate determines how life feels across seasons. In learning how to regulate both, you gain a map for understanding why some days effort flows easily and other days it drags. As we move forward, the next section will follow the anatomical paths that carry dopamine signals, tracing how separate circuits in the brain specialize in movement and in motivation. Inside your skull, two major highways of dopamine weave through different regions, each serving a distinct purpose. Though they carry the same chemical, they direct it toward separate forms of action, one toward movement, the other toward motivation. Understanding this split helps explain why dopamine disorders affect both body and mind. The first pathway begins in a region called the substantia nigra. Its cells appear dark under the microscope, which gave the area its name, black substance. From here, fibers project forward into the dorsal striatum. This connection is called the nigrostriatal pathway. Its role is largely in movement, initiating, sustaining, and smoothing the patterns of muscle activity. When dopamine in this route is depleted, as in Parkinson's disease, the ability to start motion falters, tremors emerge, steps become rigid, and even speech can slow. What this shows us is that dopamine is not just a molecule of craving, it is also the spark that lets the body act. The second pathway arises in the ventral tegmental area, a small cluster of neurons deep in the midbrain. These neurons send projections to the nucleus accumbens, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex. This is the mesocortical limbic pathway, often shortened to the reward pathway. Here, dopamine fuels pursuit, curiosity, and reinforcement. When you strive for a goal, imagine possibilities, or anticipate a reward, this system is at work. It colors experience with a sense of significance, pushing you to lean forward into life. Both pathways interact. Movement without motivation is mechanical, like a machine running without purpose. Motivation without movement remains fantasy, a thought with no action. By splitting into two streams, dopamine ensures that drive and motion can coordinate. When you feel inspired and your body rises to act, these circuits are firing in parallel. There is also a subtlety in how each pathway releases its signal. In the striatum, dopamine is more local, adjusting the fine balance of excitation and inhibition in motor circuits. In the mesolimbic system, release can be broader, influencing mood and attention in sweeping ways. This distinction explains why some interventions affect one pathway more than the other. For instance, certain medications can restore movement, yet leave motivation unchanged, or vice versa. From a practical angle, this division suggests that habits of body and habits of mind are linked through shared chemistry, Physical activity can prime the mesolimbic system, while purposeful goals can invigorate motor output. The person who exercises regularly often finds more cognitive clarity. The student who connects study to meaningful goals may feel more energy in the body. Both cases illustrate the bridge between these circuits. A gentle reflection. Imagine dopamine as a river that forks into two branches. One irrigates the fields of action, letting muscles grow and move. The other waters the gardens of desire, letting imagination and curiosity flourish. To thrive, both branches must flow, neither drying out nor flooding. In the next section, we will look at how dopamine alters the perception of time itself, stretching or compressing moments depending on the state of your system. Think back to a childhood moment when waiting felt endless, the stretch before a birthday gift, or the long pause before hearing exam results. Now recall a time of joy when hours seemed to vanish, as if time itself had quickened. These contrasting experiences reflect the subtle grip of dopamine on our sense of time. Dopamine does not only modulate motivation, it also calibrates how the brain perceives intervals. When dopamine levels rise, time seems to contract, tasks feel shorter, delays more tolerable, and anticipation sharper. When dopamine dips, moments elongate, minutes can feel like hours, and effort seems to drag. This connection between neurochemistry and time perception has been demonstrated in both animals and humans. In experiments, changes in dopamine alter the accuracy of timing tasks. Subjects either underestimate or overestimate intervals depending on the chemical state of their system. Why would evolution tie motivation to the sense of time? The answer lies in survival. Foraging animals that sense time as compressed when motivated are more likely to persist in searching for food. The discomfort of waiting is reduced, so endurance is possible. In contrast, when dopamine is low, the sense of time stretches, making further effort costly. This bias prevents wasted energy when reward likelihood is slim. In this way, dopamine synchronizes the internal clock with the value of pursuit. In daily life, this mechanism explains why studying when engaged can feel brisk, yet in states of boredom the same hour becomes unbearable. It also explains why pleasurable activities often seem to end too quickly, while tedious chores feel prolonged. The neurochemical context changes the subjective length of time. Practically, one can use this knowledge to manage focus. If you learn to attach meaning to the process, rather than only to the outcome, dopamine can rise during effort itself, compressing the sense of time. This makes sustained work less draining. Conversely, stacking too many artificial rewards such as caffeine, social scrolling, and constant background stimulation can shorten attention spans. The system expects continuous compression, and when it does not arrive, minutes feel painfully slow. Limits remain. No strategy can abolish the fundamental link. After high peaks, dopamine dips, and time expands. This is why after celebratory events or indulgences, the following day may feel sluggish and drawn out. The brain is resetting its internal balance, stretching time until the chemistry normalizes. A reflection. Time is not simply measured by clocks, but by chemistry. Dopamine paints hours with elasticity, sometimes folding them in, sometimes stretching them out. Recognizing this helps explain the ebb and flow of effort across days, not as a weakness of will but as a natural rhythm of biology. In the next section, we will explore reward prediction error, the elegant mechanism by which dopamine compares expectation to outcome and updates motivation for the future. Picture the moment of unwrapping a gift. If what you find inside is better than expected, a surge of delight floods your system. If it is worse, a hollow feeling follows. This contrast is not merely psychological, it is the operation of what neuroscientists call reward prediction error, a process deeply tied to dopamine. At its core, reward prediction error is the difference between what you anticipated and what you actually received. When the outcome exceeds expectation, dopamine neurons fire strongly, delivering a sharp phasic burst. When the outcome matches expectation, firing remains steady. When the outcome disappoints, firing pauses or drops. Through these subtle shifts, your brain constantly recalibrates motivation and learning. This mechanism allows organisms to adapt to a changing environment. Imagine foraging in the wild. If berries appear where none were expected, dopamine spikes reinforce the location, teaching you to return. If the patch yields nothing, dopamine dips, discouraging wasted effort. Over time, your nervous system builds a predictive map, saving energy and guiding behavior toward fruitful choices. In everyday life, reward prediction error explains why surprise compliments lift mood more than routine praise. or why a sudden solution to a problem feels exhilarating. It also explains why repeated indulgence dulls pleasure. The outcome no longer exceeds the forecast, so dopamine firing adapts downward. This is why the first taste of chocolate is often more rewarding than the fifth, even though the flavor has not changed. The learning component here is critical. Dopamine does not simply signal reward. It signals the gap between expected and actual reward. This gap is what drives adaptation. It tunes the brain's circuits so that future effort is directed more efficiently. Without this system, motivation would be blunt and insensitive to outcomes. With it, motivation becomes precise, sculpted by experience. There are limits, however. When external cues consistently trigger large prediction errors, the system can be hijacked. Addictive drugs, for instance, artificially generate large spikes regardless of context, teaching the brain that the substance is always valuable. Over time, natural rewards lose their ability to generate meaningful error signals, flattening motivation for ordinary life. From a practical perspective, understanding prediction error can help in structuring work or study. Small, unexpected successes like solving a problem earlier than planned carry disproportionate motivational weight. By creating environments where surprise is possible, you can harness these bursts of dopamine to sustain long-term effort. Conversely, making every outcome predictable may reduce engagement, since the system thrives on the tension between hope and uncertainty. A soft reflection. Life's richness often lies not in what is guaranteed, but in what surpasses expectation. Dopamine is the quiet accountant, always comparing the forecast to the result, and through this comparison, shaping the contours of motivation. In the next section, we will consider how intermittent reinforcement, with its irregular rhythms of reward, exploits this very principle to sustain drive far longer than predictable schedules. Imagine tossing a coin into a fountain. Sometimes it lands with a satisfying splash, sometimes the wind carries it aside. The unpredictability of the outcome keeps you engaged, because each attempt might hold a surprise. This is the essence of intermittent reinforcement, and dopamine is the chemical currency that makes it powerful. In laboratory studies, animals trained to press a lever for food respond differently depending on the reward schedule. If the food arrives every time, motivation quickly fades once hunger is satisfied. But if the food arrives only sometimes, unpredictably, the animals press with persistence far beyond immediate need. The irregular dopamine bursts generated by surprise keep the behavior alive. Humans are no different. Slot machines, lottery tickets, and social media likes all exploit intermittent reinforcement. Each unexpected win produces a strong phasic dopamine surge, far greater than predictable rewards. The uncertainty itself becomes motivating, drawing the brain into cycles of pursuit. This is why variable schedules are so resistant to extinction. Dopamine keeps whispering that the next trial might be the one. From a biological perspective, this system evolved to support survival. In natural environments, rewards such as food and shelter were rarely guaranteed. By tying motivation to unpredictability, dopamine ensured that effort continued even when success was uncertain. The same mechanism that once guided foraging now powers the stickiness of modern habits. Practically, this means that constant guaranteed rewards can undermine engagement in study or work. If you treat yourself predictably after every session, the reward prediction error disappears, and dopamine firing adapts downward. The effort begins to feel mechanical. By contrast, allowing rewards to be occasional and somewhat random preserves their motivational potency. For example, celebrating some study sessions, but not all, keeps the brain alert to the possibility of delight. There are limits to this principle. When unpredictability is too extreme, motivation can turn to frustration. If effort rarely yields reward, dopamine dips dominate, and disengagement follows. Balance is essential. The brain thrives on a mixture of predictability and surprise, enough stability to trust the process, but enough variation to keep it exciting. Intermittent reinforcement can also be harnessed deliberately. Teachers who vary the timing of feedback often sustain student engagement longer. Athletes who mix training rewards unpredictably maintain sharper motivation. Even in self-study, shifting when and how you acknowledge progress can prolong interest. The key is to let dopamine attach not only to outcomes, but to the anticipation of possibility. A gentle reflection. Life feels richer when not every outcome is guaranteed. The small surprise, the unexpected success, carries weight far beyond its size. Dopamine thrives on these moments of uncertainty, reminding us that effort is worthwhile even when results are not immediate. In the next section, we will look at what happens when we stack too many dopamine-evoking stimuli at once, and why this layering, though tempting, can erode motivation in the long run. Picture a student settling into study. They sip strong coffee, put on energizing music, open a favorite app between notes, and snack on something sweet. Each layer provides a small dopamine rise, stacking peaks on top of one another. In the moment, focus may feel sharper, mood brighter, and effort lighter. Yet beneath the surface, this layering has a hidden cost. Dopamine systems are sensitive to relative change. When multiple stimuli are combined, the resulting peak may be higher than any single activity would produce. But after each peak comes the natural drop, and when peaks are large and frequent, the following baseline sinks further. What felt like extra productivity can leave the system depleted hours later, making tasks seem heavier than before. This is why binge sessions of multitasking, music, caffeine, messages, snacks often end in exhaustion rather than satisfaction. The neurobiology behind this involves vesicle depletion and receptor adaptation. Dopamine is stored in small sacs within neurons. When many stimuli arrive at once, vesicles empty rapidly, releasing more dopamine than usual. Receptors on neighboring cells adapt to this flood by becoming less sensitive. The combination means that once the stimuli stop, less dopamine is available and the brain responds more weakly. The person feels flat, distracted, or unmotivated. This does not mean that music, caffeine, or social contact are harmful in themselves. Each can enhance motivation when used sparingly. The issue arises when they are layered together repeatedly, especially when paired with effortful tasks like study or training. The brain begins to associate the activity, not with intrinsic value, but with the cocktail of external boosters. Without them, the task feels empty, as though motivation has been drained. Practical strategies emerge from this understanding. One approach is to rotate supports rather than stack them. For example, use music during some sessions but not others, or reserve caffeine for specific times instead of daily dependence. Another is to cultivate tolerance for working without extra stimulation, letting intrinsic meaning supply the drive. Over time, this preserves baseline dopamine, making motivation less fragile. There are limits. Completely avoiding supportive cues is not necessary and may be unrealistic. The goal is balance, enjoying enhancements occasionally while keeping the core activity rewarding on its own. In this way, dopamine peaks remain modest and sustainable, and the baseline recovers more smoothly. A soft reflection. Think of motivation as a fire. Extra kindling, music, caffeine, conversation can make the flame leap higher, but if piled on constantly, the wood burns too fast and leaves ashes. Let the fire breathe, and it can glow steadily for longer. In the next section, we will explore what happens after a dopamine peak fades, why lows feel so heavy, and how the brain naturally restores balance. After every high comes a settling. The burst of energy fades, the sparkle of novelty dulls, and what once felt bright now seems muted. This is not failure of willpower, but the biology of dopamine itself. Peaks are followed by dips, and those dips can feel heavier than expected. When dopamine neurons fire intensely, they release their stored supply from small vesicles. This release is finite. Once emptied, the vesicles need time to refill through new synthesis. Until then, less dopamine is available, lowering the baseline. Meanwhile, receptors on the receiving side adapt. After strong stimulation, they reduce sensitivity, a process known as downregulation. Together, these changes mean that the brain responds more weakly after a peak, even to the same stimulus. This explains why indulgence often carries a hidden cost. A long gaming session, a binge of social scrolling, or a night of heavy reward seeking can be fun in the moment yet leave the following day flat. Tasks feel dull, motivation lags, and even pleasant experiences carry less spark. The system is not broken, it is recalibrating. The drop is the price of the surge. From an evolutionary perspective, this pattern kept foraging balanced. If early humans found a rare patch of food, a surge of dopamine would drive them to consume, but the dip that followed ensured they moved on, preventing fixation on one site once it was depleted. The cycle of peak and trough guided exploration and survival. In daily life, understanding this rhythm can reduce self-blame. Feeling unmotivated after a strong high is not laziness, it is neurochemistry. Recognizing the dip as temporary helps patience. Recovery depends on allowing time for vesicles to refill and receptors to reset. Sleep, nutrition, and periods of lower stimulation all aid this restoration. There are limits, of course. If peaks are chased constantly, the dips deepen, and the baseline drifts downward over time. This is the root of addictive spirals, the pursuit of repeated highs that eventually flatten motivation for everything else. The way back requires stepping off the cycle, letting the system reset, sometimes over days or weeks. A gentle reflection. The wave that lifts must also recede. Accepting this ebb and flow turns discouraging lows into part of the natural tide. Instead of fearing the dip, one can see it as the quiet pause between peaks, the brain's way of regaining balance. In the next section, we will examine how modern devices, especially phones, add hidden layers of stimulation, multiplying peaks in small bursts, and silently taxing tomorrow's drive. Imagine sitting down to read or work with your phone beside you. A buzz arrives, you glance. A small surge of anticipation fires through your system. Perhaps it is a message, perhaps not. Each check delivers a micro peak in dopamine, harmless in isolation, but repeated dozens or hundreds of times. These micro peaks accumulate. The cost is not felt in the moment, but in the hours that follow. Phones are uniquely potent because they combine many layers of intermittent reinforcement. Notifications arrive unpredictably. Social feeds deliver a variable ratio of interesting to dull posts. Even the act of refreshing a page mimics a slot machine lever, sometimes rewarding, sometimes empty. Each event produces a small phasic burst of dopamine, exploiting the same circuitry that evolved for foraging in uncertain environments. Over time, this creates two problems. First, baseline dopamine drifts downward. The repeated spikes deplete vesicles and adapt receptors, leaving ordinary life less stimulating. Second, attention fragments. Because dopamine signals also guide learning, the brain begins to expect novelty every few moments. Tasks requiring deep, sustained focus then feel unusually difficult, as though endurance has been eroded. Studies of device use confirm this. Heavy social media engagement correlates with reduced tolerance for boredom and lower reported motivation in unrelated tasks. Laboratory measures show that constant checking behavior reshapes how quickly dopamine neurons fire in response to cues, essentially training the system to crave more frequent stimulation. This does not mean technology is inherently harmful. Communication, learning, and creativity all benefit from digital tools. The issue arises when the phone becomes a constant layer of stimulation added on top of other activities. Reading while checking notifications, exercising while scrolling between sets, or studying with a feed open shifts the brain from intrinsic focus to fragmented pursuit of micropeaks. Practical approaches include deliberate separation, leaving the phone out of reach during focused tasks, scheduling check-ins at intervals rather than reacting instantly, or designating device-free times such as meals or study sessions. These small boundaries reduce layering, allowing activities to generate their own dopamine signals without competition. A reflective image. Think of attention as a lake. Each notification is a pebble thrown in, rippling outward and disturbing the surface. Occasional ripples add interest, but constant splashing makes the water too unsettled to reflect clearly. In the next section, we will turn to the role of stimulants, such as caffeine, nicotine, and stronger drugs, exploring how they alter dopamine release and why their effects on motivation differ so dramatically. Stimulants have long been companions of human effort. A cup of coffee before study, a cigarette during a break, or in more extreme cases, illicit drugs taken to sharpen drive, all act on dopamine, but their effects differ in intensity and consequence. Understanding this spectrum helps explain why some supports can be sustainable, while others erode motivation. Caffeine, found in coffee, tea, and yerba mate, has a modest effect on dopamine. It does not flood the system with the chemical, but increases receptor availability, making the brain more responsive to the dopamine already present. This upregulation can enhance focus and elevate mood without large crashes afterward. Over time, moderate use tends not to damage the baseline, though dependence and tolerance can develop if consumed excessively. Nicotine works differently. Inhaled through smoking or vaping, it rapidly crosses into the brain, directly stimulating dopamine release. The effect is sharper and stronger than caffeine, producing a reliable phasic spike. The predictability of this effect makes nicotine highly addictive. Each puff becomes linked to small reliefs and small pleasures, reinforcing behavior with powerful consistency. However, because the rise is transient, frequent use is needed to maintain the feeling, leading to baseline depletion and dependence. Cocaine and amphetamines are stronger still. Cocaine blocks dopamine reuptake, causing the chemical to accumulate in synapses. Amphetamines not only block reuptake, but also trigger the release of dopamine stored in vesicles, producing enormous surges. These drugs generate peaks far above natural levels, creating euphoria, but also a steep drop afterward. With repeated use, the baseline falls dramatically, and natural rewards lose their ability to evoke motivation. The brain becomes tuned only to the drug. From a clinical perspective, some amphetamine-like compounds are used therapeutically for conditions such as ADHD, where they can restore balance in individuals with atypical dopamine signaling. Yet outside such contexts, misuse can carry the same risks of depletion, tolerance, and impaired learning. The broader lesson is that the dopamine system evolved for moderate, natural peaks tied to behavior, effort, discovery, social bonding. Artificial surges, especially large ones, exploit the same circuits but at a cost. The higher the peak, the deeper the trough, and the more fragile the baseline becomes. In practical terms, this suggests using mild supports carefully. Caffeine, when enjoyed without excess, can be a sustainable ally. Stronger substances, particularly when layered with other stimulants, are more likely to erode long-term motivation. Awareness of this spectrum allows choices that preserve the delicate balance between drive and depletion. A soft reflection: stimulants are like wind on a sail. A gentle breeze can help you move steadily. A sudden gale may feel exhilarating, but risks tearing the fabric, leaving you stranded when calm returns. In the next section, we will explore how the body itself, without drugs, can trigger sustained dopamine rises through practices such as exercise, novelty, and cold exposure. The body itself contains levers for dopamine release, requiring no chemicals beyond those it already produces. Exercise, novelty, and exposure to cold are three of the most studied. Each can raise dopamine in different ways, offering a natural route to boost motivation and focus without the long-term costs of strong stimulants. Exercise is a clear example. Movement, especially when challenging, elevates dopamine both during and after activity. The magnitude of this rise depends on the individual's perception of effort. For those who enjoy running, cycling, or lifting, the surge can rival other powerful rewards. For those who dislike the activity, the increase is smaller, yet still present. What matters is engagement. Beyond dopamine, exercise also triggers endorphins and other neuromodulators, creating a cocktail of neurochemistry that enhances mood and cognitive clarity. Novelty is another trigger. The brain is wired to release dopamine when encountering something unexpected but potentially valuable. Exploring a new environment, meeting unfamiliar people, or learning a fresh skill each tap into this system. Evolutionarily, this ensured animals explored new territories for resources. In modern life, it explains why travel, creative projects, or even changing a study routine can restore motivation. The system thrives on the promise of discovery. Cold exposure engages yet another mechanism. Immersing the body in cold water produces an immediate surge in adrenaline, sharpening alertness. More surprising is the delayed but sustained rise in dopamine that follows, lasting for hours. Unlike stimulants that spike and crash, cold exposure seems to elevate baseline levels temporarily, leaving the individual more focused and calm. The discomfort at the start is part of the process, signaling the body to release neuromodulators that promote resilience. Together, these practices illustrate how behavior itself can sculpt chemistry. The advantage is that the peaks, though real, are self-limiting and naturally buffered. Exercise ends when fatigue sets in, novelty becomes familiar, and cold exposure cannot be sustained indefinitely. Each mechanism carries its own boundaries, protecting against the extreme depletion seen with artificial drugs. From a practical standpoint, weaving these into daily life provides renewable boosts. A morning run, a new challenge in the afternoon, or a brief cold shower can punctuate the day with waves of motivation. What matters is balance. Too much of any one reduces its novelty, while variety preserves the system's sensitivity. A soft reflection. Think of these practices as tuning forks for the brain. A short run, a novel idea, or a plunge into cool water each sends vibrations through your system, waking circuits that lie quiet. The resonance lingers, not overwhelming but steady, reminding you that the body itself holds tools for focus and satisfaction. In the next section, we will examine how baseline dopamine differs across individuals, why some people seem naturally driven while others appear calm or indifferent, and how genetics and experience shape these tendencies. Spend time with a group of people, and you will notice striking differences. Some leap eagerly into challenges, radiating energy and drive. Others move more slowly, appearing content with modest stimulation. These variations are not simply personality quirks. They reflect differences in baseline dopamine. sculpted by genetics and life experience. Baseline dopamine refers to the steady, background level of the chemical circulating in the brain. It is distinct from the sharp peaks that accompany rewards. A higher baseline tends to bring a sense of readiness, motivation, and outward focus. A lower baseline often feels calmer, less urgent, sometimes edging toward apathy. Neither is inherently better. Each has trade-offs. Genetic factors contribute strongly. Variants in genes that regulate dopamine synthesis, transport, and receptor density influence how much dopamine is available and how effectively it signals. Some individuals are born with systems that naturally sustain higher levels, inclining them toward risk-taking and exploration. Others inherit systems tuned to conserve energy, favoring stability and patience. These tendencies can be adaptive in different environments. One favors hunting for opportunities, the other favors persistence in stable tasks. Experience shapes baseline as well. Repeated exposure to high peaks, especially through substances, can drive the baseline downward. This is the familiar arc of tolerance and addiction. Conversely, practices that promote steady effort and healthy rhythms, exercise, structured routines, restorative sleep, help preserve or gently elevate baseline. Stress and chronic sleep loss, by contrast, erode it, leaving individuals feeling dulled. Importantly, baseline does not determine destiny. Someone with a naturally lower baseline can still cultivate strong motivation through strategy and structure, and those with higher baselines must learn moderation to avoid burning out their reserves. Understanding one's natural tendencies allows for wiser choices about stimulation, rest, and challenge. In everyday life, mismatched baselines often explain interpersonal friction. A highly driven individual may mistake a calmer companion for unmotivated, while the calmer one may see the other as restless or excessive. Recognizing these differences as biological reduces blame and opens space for appreciation of diverse strengths. Limits remain. The system can shift, but only within bounds. No amount of practice can turn a naturally steady individual into someone endlessly thrill-seeking without cost. Likewise, a naturally restless person cannot eliminate their urge for novelty, though they can channel it constructively. Balance emerges from working with rather than against one's baseline. A soft reflection. Baseline dopamine is like the background hum of an instrument. Some play in a higher key, others in a lower one. The melody of life arises not from changing the instrument entirely, but from learning to play it well. In the next section, we will look more closely at the relationship between dopamine and adrenaline, exploring how these chemical cousins work together to mobilize energy and shape emotion. Dopamine rarely acts alone. In the orchestra of brain chemistry, one of its closest companions is adrenaline, also called epinephrine. These two molecules are not just allies in function, they are family in structure. Biochemically, dopamine is a precursor to adrenaline, meaning that cells can transform one into the other along a shared pathway. This kinship explains why motivation and arousal so often arrive together. Adrenaline's primary role is to energize. Released from the adrenal glands and certain brainstem nuclei, it prepares the body for action. Heart rate rises, blood vessels shift, and muscles prime for movement. On its own, this can feel like stress or fear, a raw readiness without direction. Dopamine adds meaning. When dopamine joins the surge, the energy gains focus and purpose. What might have been felt as anxiety transforms into excitement, curiosity, or drive. This partnership is evident in many everyday experiences. Before public speaking, adrenaline surges, tightening the chest and quickening breath. If dopamine circuits engage, the moment becomes an opportunity, filled with possibility. Without dopamine, the same adrenaline can feel overwhelming, paralyzing performance. In athletics, dopamine turns adrenaline-fueled effort into pursuit of a goal rather than mere struggle. In study, dopamine colors alertness with a sense of progress. The balance between these cousins is delicate. Excess adrenaline, without enough dopamine, leads to agitation, stress, and avoidance. Excess dopamine without enough adrenaline leaves motivation unfueled, like a plan without energy. Together, in proportion, they create the state many people describe as calm focus, alert yet steady, energized yet clear. Practically, this means that tools which raise adrenaline, such as cold exposure or breath work, gain depth when paired with dopamine-releasing activities like novelty or meaningful goals. Conversely, recognizing when adrenaline is high but dopamine is low can guide strategies to restore balance, such as reframing a task to highlight its value or breaking it into achievable steps. There are limits. Chronically elevated adrenaline taxes the body, raising stress hormones and impairing recovery. Chronically elevated dopamine risks depletion and dissatisfaction. The system is designed for rhythms, not constant peaks. Sustainable motivation arises from moments when both rise together briefly, then subside, allowing restoration. A soft reflection. Think of dopamine and adrenaline as two dancers. Alone, each moves awkwardly, one with restless energy, the other with direction but no force. When they join, the dance becomes graceful, carrying you forward with rhythm and balance. In the next section, we will explore how certain daily habits, sleep, light exposure, and nutrition, quietly set the stage for healthy dopamine and adrenaline rhythms, sustaining motivation across days rather than hours. The foundations of motivation are often laid not in moments of high effort, but in the quiet routines of daily life. Sleep, light, and nutrition may seem ordinary, yet each plays a decisive role in shaping dopamine rhythms. Without them, even the best strategies for focus and drive falter. Sleep is central. During deep stages of rest, dopamine neurons replenish their vesicles, restoring the supply needed for the next day. When sleep is cut short or fragmented, this replenishment is incomplete. The result is a lower baseline, felt as dullness, irritability, or lack of motivation. Beyond chemistry, sleep also recalibrates receptor sensitivity, ensuring that the system responds appropriately to future rewards. Regular, sufficient sleep acts like maintenance, keeping the machinery of motivation well-oiled. Light exposure each morning is another hidden lever. Specialized cells in the eye detect natural light and send signals to the brain's circadian clock. This clock regulates the timing of dopamine release throughout the day. Morning light anchors the rhythm, leading to a natural rise in alertness and motivation in the hours that follow. Without this anchor, rhythms drift, leaving dopamine signals scattered and energy unpredictable. Artificial light late at night can blur these signals further, delaying recovery and dampening drive the next morning. Nutrition contributes at the molecular level. Dopamine is synthesized from the amino acid tyrosine found in many protein-rich foods. Adequate intake ensures the raw material for vesicle refilling. Micronutrients such as iron, folate, and certain vitamins act as cofactors, enabling enzymes to convert tyrosine into dopamine efficiently. Diets lacking these components can impair synthesis, leaving the system undersupplied even when other habits are strong. Together, these elements form the soil in which motivation grows. Just as a plant requires water, sunlight, and nutrients, the dopamine system thrives when sleep, light, and diet are balanced. None provide instant surges, but all sustain the baseline that makes peaks possible. Practically, this suggests small but powerful actions: prioritizing consistent sleep, stepping outside shortly after waking, and ensuring meals contain sufficient protein and micronutrients. These habits may lack the excitement of stimulants or novelty, yet their impact is profound, preventing depletion and enhancing resilience. A soft reflection. The brightest flame depends on steady fuel. Sleep, light, and nourishment are not dramatic sparks, but the quiet embers that allow fire to rise when needed. By tending to them, you prepare the ground for motivation to bloom naturally. In the next section, we will turn to the darker side of dopamine, how addiction develops when peaks are chased too often, narrowing life's pleasures to a single source, and dimming all others. Addiction can be understood as a narrowing of what brings joy. At first, many activities evoke dopamine: study, friendship, food, play. Over time, when one stimulus is pursued too often or too intensely, the system adapts. Peaks shrink, baselines fall, and other experiences lose their ability to spark interest. Life becomes reduced to chasing the one source that still promises relief. Biologically, addiction reflects two processes: sensitization and depletion. Sensitization means that cues linked to the addictive behavior, sights, smells, times of day, trigger strong anticipatory dopamine responses, pulling attention and desire toward the behavior. Depletion means that actual engagement delivers less and less dopamine, because vesicles are drained and receptors downregulated. The paradox is clear: wanting grows stronger while liking fades. This pattern appears across substances and behaviors. Cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, and amphetamines exploit the same reward circuits as gambling, video games, or compulsive social media use. The form differs, but the neurochemistry rhymes. Each produces repeated peaks, each drives the baseline downward, and each reshapes the brain to expect reward from fewer sources. Clinically, the most damaging shift is in motivation. Activities that once felt meaningful, relationships, study, hobbies, no longer evoke dopamine. Without reinforcement, they are abandoned, and life contracts around the addiction. This is why addiction is often described as hijacking the reward system. It monopolizes the brain's motivational machinery. Recovery requires time and abstinence, allowing vesicles to refill and receptors to resensitize. During this reset, life can feel flat, because ordinary activities no longer deliver satisfaction. With patience, however, the baseline rises again, and broader rewards regain value. Supportive habits, exercise, novelty, social connection can accelerate this process by providing natural dopamine surges without extreme peaks. Limits must be acknowledged. For some individuals, genetic vulnerabilities or early experiences make the dopamine system more prone to addictive spirals. Awareness of this predisposition can guide preventive strategies, such as setting boundaries with substances or digital platforms. No one is immune, but some carry greater risk. A gentle reflection. Addiction is like walking down a narrowing path. At first, it feels full of possibility. Gradually, the walls close in until only one route remains. Recovery is the slow widening of that path, step by step, until the horizon opens again. In the next section, we will explore how novelty, challenge, and variability can be harnessed to prevent monotony, keeping the dopamine system engaged without tipping into depletion. The dopamine system thrives on change. When a task is too predictable, dopamine release fades, leaving the experience flat. When novelty appears, something new to explore or a challenge to overcome, the system awakens. This is why variety feels energizing, and why even small changes in routine can restore interest. At a neural level, dopamine neurons are tuned not just to reward, but to surprise. When an outcome is better than expected, dopamine firing increases. When it is worse, firing decreases. This prediction error signal helps the brain learn which behaviors are worth repeating. If everything unfolds exactly as predicted, no new learning occurs, and dopamine remains steady. Thus, novelty and challenge are essential to keeping the motivational circuits alive. Practical application of this principle is straightforward. Rotating study locations, experimenting with new problem sets, or introducing unfamiliar skills into training sessions all create small bursts of novelty. Even rearranging a workspace or shifting the order of tasks can refresh motivation. These changes need not be dramatic. The brain responds to subtle deviations from expectation. Challenge operates in a similar way. When a task is just beyond current ability, dopamine release accompanies effort and progress. Too easy, and there is little reward. Too difficult, and failure suppresses dopamine. The sweet spot lies at the edge of competence, where success is uncertain but possible. This is the zone in which growth feels meaningful, and the chemistry of learning reinforces perseverance. Yet novelty and challenge must be balanced with stability. Constant change prevents consolidation of skills and can exhaust attention. The system benefits from alternating rhythms, periods of stability to deepen mastery, punctuated by moments of novelty to rekindle motivation. Like music, motivation flows best when variation dances with repetition. Reflection brings this into focus. Think of life as a landscape. If the terrain never changes, the journey grows dull. If it shifts too violently, the traveler becomes lost. But when steady paths are interspersed with new vistas, curiosity and energy carry the traveler forward. In the next section, we will look at the principle of intermittent reinforcement, how unpredictable rewards sustain motivation more effectively than consistent ones, and how this mechanism can be used both wisely and harmfully. Intermittent reinforcement is among the most powerful principles in behavioral neuroscience. It refers to rewards that arrive unpredictably, sometimes present, sometimes absent, sometimes large, sometimes small. This pattern of uncertainty drives dopamine release more strongly than predictable, steady rewards. It is the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive, and why refreshing a social feed feels compelling. Dopamine neurons signal not only the arrival of reward but also the gap between expectation and outcome. When an outcome is better than expected, firing increases. When worse, it decreases. Under intermittent reinforcement, the brain never quite knows what to expect. Each check or attempt carries the possibility of a surprising win. This uncertainty keeps circuits engaged, producing repeated phasic bursts of dopamine. In natural environments, this system promoted survival. Foraging animals could not predict which berry bush would hold fruit or which patch of land would offer prey. Uncertainty ensured persistent searching, guided by dopamine. In modern contexts, the same circuitry is engaged by digital platforms, gambling, and other design systems that harness variable reward schedules to maximize engagement. The strength of intermittent reinforcement explains why predictable rewards often lose their appeal. A gold star for every drawing eventually reduces a child's intrinsic enjoyment of art, but occasional praise, unexpected recognition, or varied outcomes keep motivation alive. For adults, the same holds true. When effort always yields the same outcome, the system grows less responsive. Harnessing this principle constructively requires care. Intermittent reinforcement can sustain habits, such as exercise or study, by varying conditions, sometimes working with music, sometimes without, sometimes setting a timed challenge, sometimes not. It can also be built into self-reward systems, where small, unpredictable treats accompany effort rather than being guaranteed. The key is that unpredictability maintains engagement. Yet the limits are clear. Systems that exploit intermittent reinforcement without boundaries, gambling machines, endless scrolling platforms, can hijack attention and erode well-being. Awareness of the mechanism helps individuals step back, recognizing that the pull comes not from genuine value, but from uncertainty itself. A reflective image. Intermittent rewards are like sparks in the dark. Not every step lights the path, but the possibility keeps you moving forward. Used wisely, they sustain curiosity. Used recklessly, they can keep you circling endlessly in the same spot. In the next section, we will explore how goals and achievements interact with dopamine, and why the celebration of effort often sustains motivation more effectively than the pursuit of outcomes alone. Goals are natural anchors for the dopamine system. They provide direction, shaping where effort is applied and how rewards are anticipated. Yet the way goals are framed determines whether dopamine sustains motivation or undermines it. Outcomes, when emphasized too strongly, can produce brief peaks followed by steep drops. Effort, when valued, creates steadier reinforcement that carries through the process. At the biological level, dopamine release is closely tied to progress toward a goal, not just its completion. Small signals of advancement, finishing a paragraph, solving a problem, completing a training set, each deliver modest surges that keep circuits engaged. When attention is placed only on the final outcome, these incremental reinforcements are missed, and the brain waits for a single large peak. Once it arrives, the baseline drops sharply, leaving motivation flat. Research on mindset illustrates this difference. When individuals are praised for effort, "You worked hard on this problem," they tend to persist longer, seek greater challenges, and show resilience after setbacks. Their dopamine system learns to associate release with the act of striving itself. When praise is tied only to outcomes, "You are smart for getting it right," dopamine becomes linked to external validation. Motivation weakens if the outcome is absent or delayed. In daily life, this principle applies broadly. A student who enjoys the process of studying feels small bursts of satisfaction each time a concept clicks, sustaining attention. A student who studies only for the grade experiences tension until results arrive, then a crash afterward. The same is true in sports, work, and relationships. Celebrating effort keeps dopamine flowing across time, while focusing only on endpoints produces brief highs followed by long lows. This is not to dismiss goals. Clear endpoints guide effort and provide structure, but the deeper skill is learning to place dopamine within the journey itself. By framing each step as meaningful progress, the brain rewards engagement, not just completion. Reflection clarifies the point. Imagine climbing a mountain. If joy comes only at the summit, the climb feels long and draining, and the descent may be empty. If each step, each view, and each moment of exertion carries its own satisfaction, then the mountain becomes not just a peak, but an experience enriched at every stage. In the next section, we will examine how modern culture often pushes for constant optimization, always higher peaks, always greater productivity, and why this relentless pursuit can undermine the very dopamine balance it seeks to enhance. Modern culture often celebrates constant growth and optimization. Messages urge us to be more productive, more efficient, more focused. Tools and habits are stacked to squeeze out higher peaks of performance. At first, these practices can feel empowering, but when pursued relentlessly, they strain the dopamine system, leading to fatigue, loss of motivation, and even burnout. The biology explains why. Dopamine thrives on rhythms of rise and fall. Peaks feel energizing only when contrasted with steady baselines and occasional lows. If life becomes a constant pursuit of stimulation through work, digital engagement, or self-improvement routines, the system has no chance to reset. Vesicles deplete, receptors desensitize, and the background tone drops. What once felt motivating now feels obligatory, and satisfaction slips away. This cycle is reinforced by social comparison. Seeing others display achievements online or in professional circles primes dopamine circuits to crave similar peaks. The pursuit becomes less about intrinsic growth and more about matching external benchmarks. In such contexts, even success can feel hollow, because the baseline has already fallen beneath the peaks. The irony is that striving for continuous optimization undermines the very capacity for sustained motivation. Periods of rest, unstructured play, and reflection may appear unproductive, yet they are biologically necessary. They allow vesicles to refill, circuits to resensitize, and the baseline to rise again. Without these valleys, the peaks flatten into a weary plateau. Practically, this suggests that cycles of effort and recovery are not indulgences but essential design features of the dopamine system. Intense study or work sessions are best paired with pauses, light physical activity or time outdoors. Digital detoxes, moments of silence, or creative hobbies without goals also help restore balance. What matters is contrast, letting the system experience both stimulation and stillness. A soft reflection. Think of motivation like the tide. The waves of drive and energy are meaningful because they rise and fall. If the water were always high, the shoreline would lose its shape. By allowing rhythms, the coastline of life remains defined, and the sea can return again with force. In the next section, we will explore practical strategies for designing a personal dopamine schedule, a rhythm of effort, rest, novelty, and reward that sustains motivation across weeks and months. Every biological system is rhythmic. The heart contracts and relaxes. Breathing cycles in and out. Cells generate energy in pulses, not streams. The brain is no different. Dopamine neurons do not fire at a constant rate. They shift between tonic release, the steady baseline, and phasic bursts, the peaks that mark effort, reward, and novelty. Designing a personal dopamine schedule means arranging life in rhythms that align with the biology of peaks and baselines. It is not about squeezing more stimulation into every hour, nor about denying pleasure altogether. Rather, it is about respecting the natural cycles that the brain and body have evolved over millennia. These cycles involve rises and falls, surges and stabilizations, times of outward pursuit and times of inward renewal. When honored, they sustain motivation not for hours but for years, protecting both vitality and satisfaction. This expanded reflection will unfold in 6 parts: the science of rhythms, the role of effort, the necessity of recovery, the gift of novelty, the grounding of reflection, and the design of daily, weekly, and seasonal arcs. Along the way, we will explore metaphors, examples, and cautions, building a practical yet gentle framework for living in harmony with dopamine. When these rhythms are respected, the system maintains sensitivity. Peaks feel vibrant, and baselines feel stable. But when rhythms are ignored, when stimulation is constant, or when recovery is absent, sensitivity dulls, peaks lose their intensity, and baselines sag. This is why chasing endless novelty eventually leads to boredom, and why working without pause leads to exhaustion. A personal dopamine schedule is, in essence, a way of syncing your activities with these biological rhythms. It is like tuning an instrument to the key of your own nervous system, so that effort and rest, novelty and reflection, combine into a melody rather than noise. Effort comes first. Dopamine is often described as the molecule of reward, but its primary function is to drive pursuit. When you lean into a challenge, studying a difficult text, practicing a demanding skill, or pushing through physical training, dopamine release increases to support persistence. However, effort is not boundless. Dopamine vesicles, the tiny packets of neurotransmitters stored in neurons, can only release so much before needing time to refill. If effort is extended endlessly without pause, the system depletes. What was once motivating becomes dull. What once sparked curiosity becomes aversive. The solution is to structure effort in intervals, concentrated bouts long enough to be challenging but not endless. Keep the system engaged. This is why many traditions of learning, from monastic study to modern productivity science, converge on the value of focused sessions. Whether it is a period of reading, writing, or training, the key is to define effort in units that honor both challenge and sustainability. An important nuance: effort is not just about external tasks. Even internal challenges, working through complex emotions, sustaining mindfulness, or resisting distraction, are forms of effort that consume dopamine. Recognizing this prevents underestimating how much recovery will later be needed. Recovery can take many forms. Sleep is the deepest, restoring both dopamine and other neuromodulators, but shorter pauses also matter. walking outside, gentle stretching, light conversation, or quiet rest without digital input. Even moments of simple stillness, looking out a window, breathing without rush, allow the system to reset. It is crucial to distinguish between active recovery and disguised stimulation. Scrolling through feeds or jumping between digital inputs may feel like rest, but they often trigger small dopamine spikes that prevent true restoration. The nervous system interprets them as effort, not recovery. After effort comes recovery. This is not wasted time, but essential chemistry. Recovery allows vesicles to refill, receptors to resensitize, and baselines to stabilize. Without it, motivation collapses. Novelty does not need to be grand. It can be as simple as studying in a different room, walking a new path, or trying a fresh approach to a familiar task. These small shifts prevent the brain from dulling its response. One way to picture recovery is as the soil between harvests. Effort draws nutrients upward, producing growth. Recovery lets the soil absorb rain and replenish minerals. Without it, the next planting yields less. While effort and recovery sustain cycles, novelty renews them. Dopamine neurons are exquisitely sensitive to change. A new environment, a new skill, or a new perspective triggers phasic bursts, reawakening circuits that habituate to routine. Too much novelty, however, overwhelms. Constant change prevents consolidation, leaving the baseline unsettled. The art is in sprinkling novelty into steady routines, like seasoning, not the whole meal. The final element is reflection. While effort sparks dopamine and novelty refreshes it, reflection shifts the system from external to internal reinforcement. A helpful guideline is proportional novelty. Small tasks benefit from small changes, like using a new pen or playlist. Major pursuits benefit from larger novelty, like changing environments for a week or learning a complementary skill. In both cases, novelty should refresh without displacing the rhythm of effort and recovery. When you pause to notice progress, writing about a completed task, sharing insights with a friend, or simply acknowledging persistence, you strengthen intrinsic motivation. The brain learns not only to chase outcomes, but to value the process itself. This prevents the post-peak crash that comes when all reward is tied to external results. Reflection can be brief, a few sentences in a journal, a moment of gratitude before sleep, or a mindful acknowledgement during a break. What matters is consistency. Each act of reflection weaves effort, recovery, and novelty into a coherent story, making motivation self-sustaining. Reflection also acts as a safeguard against over-reliance on validation. When progress is noticed internally, external recognition becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. This stabilizes baselines and reduces vulnerability to comparison or envy. How do these elements, effort, recovery, novelty, reflection, translate into schedules? They can be arranged at multiple scales, each reinforcing the other. Morning, concentrated effort when dopamine is naturally rising. Daily rhythm. Afternoon, novelty, exploring new approaches or environments. Midday, recovery through light movement or rest. Evening, reflection, anchoring progress and preparing for rest. Weekly rhythm. Weekends or designated days for deeper recovery and novelty, exploring nature, social connection, or creative play. Several days of sustained effort balanced with restorative evenings. Seasonal rhythm. Weekly reflection, reviewing growth and recentering values. Phases of intense pursuit, academic terms, creative projects, training cycles. This fractal structure, daily, weekly, seasonal, mirrors biology. Just as neurons fire in bursts nested within rhythms, human lives flourish when cycles are nested within cycles. Seasonal reflection, realigning goals, noticing long arcs of progress, and adjusting schedules, followed by phases of consolidation, integration, and rest. Imagine a garden. If it is worked constantly without pause, the soil depletes. If it is abandoned, weeds overtake it. But with cycles of planting, resting, watering, and tending, the garden yields again and again. The key across all levels is contrast. Without recovery, effort drains the system. Without novelty, routines dull. Without reflection, progress feels empty. Contrast preserves sensitivity, making each element meaningful. Think of music. A song with only loud notes is noise. A song with silence between phrases becomes melody. Effort is the notes, recovery the rests, novelty the changes in key, and reflection the sense of harmony. Together they create not just productivity but music worth living. Your dopamine system is such a garden. Effort plants, recovery waters, novelty refreshes, and reflection tends. The harvest is not only achievements but resilience, the capacity to remain motivated over a lifetime without burning out. As we close this section, hold the image of your personal dopamine schedule, not as a rigid timetable, but as a living rhythm. It is less about strict control and more about alignment, moving with biology rather than against it. In the next section, we will see how this rhythm interacts with the social dimension, revealing why relationships are among the most powerful motivators and how they shape both individual drive and collective purpose. Human beings are wired for connection, and dopamine is deeply involved in that wiring. Our survival as a species has always depended on bonds with parents, partners, groups, and communities. The same molecule that drives an individual to seek food or water also drives them to seek companionship and belonging. In this sense, dopamine is not only a motivator for individual pursuits, but also a hidden architect of society. It reinforces laughter, conversation, trust, and recognition, shaping the web of interactions that form cultures. At the neural level, social connection recruits many of the same reward pathways as material pleasures. When you share a smile with another person, neurons in the ventral tegmental area release dopamine into the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. This strengthens the association between the other person's presence and the feeling of reward. Over time, bonds become sticky, not only psychologically but biologically. This section will explore in depth how dopamine operates in social life. We will examine neural pathways that make connection rewarding, how collective experiences amplify motivation, how loneliness depletes baseline, and how hierarchies and validation can both sustain and destabilize the system. Finally, we will reflect on practices that nurture healthy social dopamine rhythms without losing inner grounding. This mechanism is especially evident in parent-infant interactions. When a caregiver hears a baby's laugh or sees the child smile, dopamine surges create a sense of warmth and motivation to continue caregiving. The infant's brain, in turn, links the caregiver's presence with safety and pleasure. This reciprocal loop is one of the oldest social circuits in our species. Without it, cooperation and protection would crumble. One of dopamine's most powerful roles in social life is amplification. When a task is completed collectively, the dopamine released is greater than when completed alone. Studies of team sports, musical ensembles, and group problem-solving show that cooperation not only improves outcomes, but also heightens reward responses. In adulthood, the same circuitry extends to friendships, romantic partnerships, and group belonging. When laughter spreads in a room, dopamine floods multiple brains simultaneously. This synchrony reinforces the bond, making future gatherings more likely. Social neuroscientists sometimes describe this as neural resonance, a phenomenon where brains literally align during shared joy. Consider the example of a choir. Singing alone can be pleasurable, but singing in harmony with others produces a distinctly uplifting state. Breathing synchronizes, voices blend, and dopamine surges with oxytocin, deepening the sense of connection. The same principle applies to military drills, collective rituals, or even synchronized dancing. Rhythmic activity plus shared intention creates a biochemical cocktail that cements bonds and motivates groups toward common goals. Digital technology provides a more modest form of this. A message notification can produce a small burst of dopamine through anticipation, especially when it signals recognition or inclusion. Though weaker than face-to-face interaction, these cues still engage reward pathways. The anticipation of a reply, a like, or a shared joke reveals how finely tuned our dopamine system is to social cues, even virtual ones. Just as connection raises dopamine, disconnection lowers it. Loneliness, social rejection, and exclusion reliably reduce baseline dopamine levels. The brain interprets isolation as a signal of danger, because for most of human history, to be cut off from the group meant increased risk of death. This reduction in baseline explains why lonely individuals often feel less motivated to engage in daily activities. The world seems muted, drained of color. Without the stabilizing effects of social contact, dopamine reserves are depleted more easily. In this state, people often seek artificial peaks to fill the void: substances, compulsive gaming, or endless scrolling. These activities provide temporary relief, but deepen the crash, leaving the baseline even lower. Dopamine is not only about bonding, but also about position within groups. Social hierarchies, whether in primates or humans, are reinforced through dopamine pathways. Recognition, Praise or status shifts activate the same reward circuits as tangible rewards. When someone receives acknowledgement for their contribution, dopamine strengthens the link between effort and social standing. Chronic loneliness also alters perception of time. Hours can feel elongated, as dopamine's role in temporal processing falters. A day spent alone may feel heavier, while the same day spent in warm company seems to pass quickly. This distortion itself can feed the cycle, making isolation more difficult to escape. This system is adaptive. It motivates individuals to contribute to the group, whether by hunting, teaching, or caring. But it has a shadow side. When validation becomes the only source of dopamine, comparison and envy arise. The brain begins to crave status itself, not contribution. This can lead to cycles of rivalry, burnout, or dependence on external praise. Modern social media intensifies this mechanism. Each like or share delivers a microdose of status dopamine. At first, this motivates creativity or outreach, but over time the baseline drops, and individuals need more recognition to feel the same satisfaction. The pursuit of social validation becomes compulsive, eroding intrinsic motivation. One of dopamine's most elegant features in social life is reciprocity. Acts of generosity often produce as much release as acts of receiving. Helping a friend, offering comfort, or contributing to a cause engages reward circuits, making giving inherently motivating. This reciprocity may have evolved to stabilize cooperation. If giving were always depleting, generosity would wither. Instead, the brain ensures that helping carries its own reward, sustaining social bonds over time. Importantly, reciprocity does not require equal exchange. The act itself is rewarding, independent of return, though long-term imbalance can strain bonds. Shared rituals of generosity, gift-giving, communal meals, volunteering, capitalize on this circuitry. They transform giving from an individual act into a cultural glue, reinforcing belonging across generations. While social dopamine is powerful, it is not limitless. A fragile baseline cannot be fully restored through connection alone. For instance, someone deeply depleted by chronic stress may enjoy temporary relief in company, but without personal restoration, the baseline remains low. Moreover, over-reliance on external validation can tether motivation to factors beyond control. If every rise in dopamine depends on praise, likes, or recognition, then self-worth fluctuates with external tides. This creates vulnerability to manipulation and instability in mood. Cultivating healthy social dopamine rhythms requires intention. Several practices can help. The healthiest bonds are those that balance external reinforcement with internal grounding. They provide joy and stability, but do not replace personal rhythms of rest, reflection, and self-care. Shared activities from meals to group walks, these amplify dopamine through collective effort. Generosity, acts of giving, whether material or emotional, sustain reciprocity. Regular contact with trusted friends, even brief conversations stabilize baselines. Boundaries, protecting time for solitude, prevents over-reliance on external validation. These are not prescriptions but gentle guidelines. The goal is not to maximize social dopamine, but to harmonize it, allowing connection to enrich motivation without overwhelming it. Awareness of comparison, recognizing when motivation is driven by status alone helps restore balance. Think of dopamine in relationships as a thread. Alone, a thread is fragile, easily frayed. Woven with others, it becomes fabric, resilient, supportive, expansive. Every interaction is a stitch, every shared laugh a knot, every act of care, a strengthening of the weave. Human motivation is not only individual but collective. Dopamine makes sure of that. In connection, we find not only pleasure but resilience, not only laughter but meaning. When you feel isolated, remember, your baseline may be low, not because you lack discipline, but because your biology longs for connection. When you feel uplifted in company, remember, this is not only emotion but chemistry, a system designed to bind us together. And when you feel pulled into comparison, recall that the same system that fuels rivalry can also fuel generosity, if guided with awareness. In the next section, we will close by exploring how an understanding of dopamine can be carried forward into daily practice, offering gentle strategies to sustain focus, satisfaction, and balance over the long arc of life. Dopamine is often described as the molecule of motivation, but by now we can see it as something broader, a rhythm setter for human life. It shapes how you perceive effort, how you relate to rewards, how you experience relationships, and even how you measure the passage of time. To expand this view into daily practice, let us gather the threads of everything we have explored: peaks and baselines, effort and recovery, novelty and stability, connection and solitude, and weave them into a practical, gentle framework. This final section will be longer, an extended reflection, so that you can carry the science into your own rhythms of study, work, and rest. Imagine waking each day with a compass in hand. The compass needle does not point north, but toward whatever captures your motivation. Some days it swings toward study, other days toward connection, sometimes toward distraction. Dopamine is that needle. It does not dictate values or morality. It simply highlights what feels salient, what seems worth effort. Understanding this compass requires remembering that dopamine is not pleasure itself, but the anticipation of possibility. The excitement before beginning a project, the drive to continue when challenges arise, the spark of curiosity when encountering something new, all of these are dopamine's language. Pleasure, satisfaction, and contentment often involve other chemicals, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, but dopamine prepares the way, saying, "Move forward, there is something here." The challenge in modern life is that so many artificial signals compete for your compass. Digital platforms, advertisements, substances, and engineered environments deliver rapid peaks, pulling the needle again and again. Without awareness, you may find yourself chasing quick jolts rather than sustaining long journeys. The compass spins wildly, leaving you disoriented. To steady it, you need rhythm. You cannot remove dopamine from life, nor would you want to. Instead, you can learn to shape its cycles: peaks that inspire, valleys that restore, baselines that stabilize. Consider how one day unfolds. At waking, dopamine is low to moderate, shaped by sleep and circadian rhythms. Morning light raises alertness and begins a gentle climb. Here lies the first choice. Do you spike dopamine immediately with caffeine, digital engagement, or novelty, or do you allow the natural rhythm to unfold? A sustainable architecture might look like this. Morning. Light exposure anchors the circadian clock. Gentle physical movement and a balanced meal provide raw materials for dopamine synthesis. The system rises naturally, creating readiness without depletion. This is a time for focused work, when baseline is fresh. Midday. Effort is paired with small breaks. Stepping outside, moving the body, or practicing a few minutes of mindful breathing helps maintain sensitivity. Novelty can be introduced here, a new environment, a fresh perspective on a problem to prevent habituation. Afternoon. Energy dips, as circadian signals reduce dopamine release. Rather than fighting this, the rhythm can be respected. Lighter tasks, creative exploration, or collaborative work fit here, allowing recovery without full disengagement. Evening. As light fades, dopamine should fall, preparing the system for rest. Heavy stimulation, bright screens, intense competition, or emotionally charged input can delay this descent, leading to poor sleep and lower baselines the next day. Gentle social connection, reflection, or quiet hobbies restore balance. This architecture is not rigid. It bends to individual differences and life demands. But the principle is steady. Respect the natural rise and fall, and avoid forcing peaks at every moment. Just as days have rhythms, so do longer spans. A week of intense study or work should be followed by deliberate restoration. A season of novelty, travel, new projects, social expansion should be followed by a season of consolidation, where the baseline rises quietly. Without these arcs, the system dulls, motivation wanes, and satisfaction evaporates. One way to visualize this is to imagine life as breathing. Inhale, effort, novelty, challenge. Exhale, rest, reflection, stability. Trying to inhale constantly suffocates. Exhaling too long leads to stagnation. The balance of inhale and exhale sustains vitality. Planning weeks with this rhythm in mind can prevent burnout. For example, alternating between weeks of deep focus and lighter integration ensures that dopamine peaks are balanced with baseline restoration. Over months, alternating between expansion and consolidation allows both growth and grounding. 1 point. Cold exposure and breathwork. These practices deliver natural surges of dopamine and adrenaline, creating a state of calm alertness. Used occasionally, they refresh circuits. Used excessively, they risk desensitization. Their power lies in moderation. 2. Movement. Exercise raises dopamine modestly and sustainably, especially when it is enjoyable. Variety prevents habituation. Rhythm prevents exhaustion. Pairing movement with reflection, such as walking in nature, combines physical and psychological restoration. 3. Nutrition. Tyrosine-rich foods provide building blocks. Micronutrients enable synthesis. Caffeine, particularly from sources like yerba mate, enhances receptor sensitivity, but stimulant overuse undermines balance. The principle, fuel, do not force. Sleep. The baseline cannot recover without deep rest. Prioritizing consistent schedules, darkness at night and light in the morning strengthens rhythms. Sleep is the quiet partner of dopamine, invisible but essential. 5. Social connection. Trusted relationships stabilize baselines and provide motivation that extends beyond self-interest. Isolation lowers dopamine, while healthy bonds replenish it. The key is authenticity. Superficial connection rarely sustains. 6. Reflection. Journaling, mindful awareness, or simply pausing to notice progress shifts dopamine release from outcomes to effort. This rewires the system to value the journey, protecting against sharp crashes after goals are achieved. Dopamine is not infinite, and chasing constant elevation is self-defeating. Every peak is followed by a dip. Every surge must be balanced. Attempts to override this biology through stimulants, compulsive behaviors, or relentless work eventually backfire, leaving baselines depleted. It is also important to note that dopamine does not act alone. Serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, and many other molecules shape well-being. Focusing exclusively on dopamine risks a narrow view. The goal is not to maximize dopamine, but to harmonize it within the larger orchestra of brain chemistry. Finally, individuals vary. Genetic differences, developmental history, and life experiences influence how the system responds. Some may be more prone to addiction, others to low baseline motivation. Self-awareness, and when needed, clinical guidance are essential. Think of dopamine as a river. When it flows steadily, it carries you forward with energy and purpose. When it surges too high, it floods, damaging the banks. When it dries, the land cracks and life struggles. The art of living with dopamine is the art of water management, guiding the flow, respecting its rhythms, allowing it to replenish. A sustainable life is not one of constant peaks, but of balanced currents. Effort, novelty, recovery, reflection. These are the channels that keep the river alive. Social bonds are the tributaries, sleep the underground springs, and meaning the destination. You do not need to control every drop. You only need to shape the rhythms gently, honoring the cycles that biology has written into your nervous system. By doing so, you can find motivation that lasts, focus that steadies, and satisfaction that deepens, not as fleeting sparks, but as enduring light. In the final wind down, we will slow the rhythm even further, inviting you to rest with the knowledge that your motivation is not fragile but renewable, and that balance is the true foundation of drive. We have traveled a long path together, through the circuits of dopamine, the rise and fall of motivation, the balance of peaks and baselines, the influence of novelty, effort, connection, and rest. Along the way, we have seen how this single molecule shapes not just fleeting states of desire, but the long arc of how life feels meaningful. As we arrive at the close, it is time to let the pace slow. Imagine a pendulum, swinging with steady rhythm. Effort is the forward swing, recovery the return, novelty lifts it higher, stability brings it back. Your own life carries this rhythm, whether or not you notice. To live in harmony with dopamine is to let the pendulum swing naturally, without forcing it to freeze at one extreme. Take a breath and picture the journey of a single day. Morning light lifting your baseline, small efforts marking progress, each a quiet surge, pauses that refill the system, like gentle rains replenishing the soil. Evening bringing the descent, not as loss, but as invitation to rest. This rhythm is not fragile, it is resilient, designed to renew itself again and again. If at times you feel unmotivated, remember, it is not failure, it is biology asking for balance. If at times you feel driven, remember, it is a gift to be savored, not stretched endlessly. Motivation and satisfaction are not opposites but partners, woven together by dopamine's rise and fall. In relationships, in study, in work, the same truth holds. Lasting drive is not found in chasing every spark, but in tending the quiet fire that remains when sparks fade. Growth comes not only from peaks of achievement, but from the steady return to effort after rest. So as you close this lecture, allow yourself to carry one thought gently forward. Your motivation is renewable. With rhythm, with awareness, with compassion for your own biology, you can sustain focus and satisfaction without burning out. Dopamine is not a master to be controlled, but a rhythm to be understood, a current that can carry you calmly, steadily, toward what matters most. Thank you for sharing this time. May the science serve as both knowledge and comfort, guiding you toward balance, curiosity, and rest.